Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Sleepy Grimoire. It's a pleasure to have you here once again tonight for another evening of rest and cozy stories. Tonight, you'll cross the bridge of sleep toward a hidden village nestled among the hills. The streets are cobbled, the air smells like firewood, and the silence is gently broken by soft sounds, the distant whistle of a kettle, the crackle of a lit oven, the flutter of a curtain when the wind decides to enter. That's where the baker lives, a man with an easy laugh and hands that carry the warmth of wheat. He wakes before dawn, swearing that his first burnt batch is an offering to the bakery gods, and maybe it really is. A few corners away, the tailor works under the yellow light of an oil lamp, surrounded by fabrics that resemble clouds and the colors of autumn. He speaks little, but there's wisdom in the way he sews. Each stitch is a well-settled thought, each thread a secret that time asked him to keep. And there, in the blue townhouse, lives a woman who for a long time mistook silence for loneliness. Today, though, she opens the windows to the wind, and the wind answers with the scent of pumpkin and cinnamon pie. At the center of it all is the Kettle house, a small inn where the fireplace never sleeps, and where the apple tea seems to have the power to fix what the day has undone. Its owner, Miss Alba, writes down the name of every guest in an old, worn book, as if lighting candles on an altar of memories. That's where we're going tonight. You'll be welcomed by the tinkling of a bell above the door, the baker's laughter, the sweet smell of bread, and the warmth of a story that tells itself. So close your eyes. Let the sound of rain carry you through the village streets until the moment the kettle whistles to announce the night has begun and kindness is being served. The Kettle house. The sun was still crawling between the rooftops when the first smell of bread began to drift through the village. There was something sacred about the ritual, the oven lit before the birds began to sing, flour rising in soft clouds, the muffled sound of dough being kneaded with care. The baker mumbled, like someone praying without realizing it. Breathe, dough. The miracle lives in the air. Outside, the world was slowly waking up, wrapped in mist and the scent of firewood. He was a man of rounded gestures. Everything about him seemed shaped by the rhythm of the oven. His big hands knew the exact weight of generosity, and his apron held more stories than recipes. The first batch, as always, came out toasted, and he laughed, unhurried, blowing on the golden steam. "The bakery gods have been served," he said, turning to no one in particular. "And if they haven't, they'll learn to wait, just like the bread waits for the right warmth." A child passing by on the street, hooded and curious, stopped in front of the window. "Why do you burn the bread every day?" she asked. The baker looked over his glasses and answered playfully, "Because you need to mess up a little to get the rest right." The girl laughed, not fully understanding, but sensing a truth hidden there, the kind that only reveals itself with time, like yeast working in the dark. While the bread was rising in the oven, the baker watched the blue townhouse across the street through the window. The curtains were usually closed, but that morning a sliver had opened. Inside, the quiet neighbor, owner of a house far too silent, was watching the smoke rise. The smell of roasting pumpkin drifted through the window like an invitation. She closed her eyes for a moment and, without realizing it, smiled. Later, the baker placed a pie in a basket, still warm, covered with a cotton cloth. He climbed the townhouse stairs, hesitant, and knocked gently on the door. "I brought a little piece of autumn," he said when she opened it. The woman looked at the pie, looked at him, and answered in a soft, almost shy whisper. "So autumn tastes like cinnamon," he laughed, "and like courage. Sometimes." She accepted the gift, and the air between them grew lighter, as if the scent of nutmeg had just found a new home. Meanwhile, in the alley behind the bakery, The tailor was battling with the thread of a stubborn needle. His workshop was an organized chaos, threads hanging like colorful webs, fabrics stacked in piles, the smell of wet wool from the rain. He sighed. Lost the button again. He rummaged through his apron, drawers, the floor. Nothing. These buttons have legs, I swear. Then a tiny voice answered from the doorway. Found it. It was the same child who visited the baker. She held the button like someone holding the sun. The tailor smiled. So it went out wandering again, huh? Maybe it just wanted to see the world. Or maybe it wanted to find you. The girl gave the button back, and he sewed it on with precision. There. Back home. Then he poured her a cup of tea that seemed to hold the same warmth as kind words. Apple tea. Of course, everything here tastes like apples. Their laughter filled the room, blending with the sound of rain outside. Across the street, Miss Alba was wiping down the counter at the Kettle house. The inn seemed to breathe with her. The floor creaked gently, the curtains danced with the breeze, and the kettle whistled in a tune that had already become the soundtrack of the place. She opened the old guest book, its leather cover worn by time, and ran her fingers over the pages. Each name there was a small beacon lit in the past. Every visitor leaves behind a little warmth, she murmured. And warmth is what keeps the world turning. Between the pages, something slipped out, an old letter carefully folded. Alba opened it slowly, her fingers deliberate. When the leaves fall again, I'll be on the stone bridge, the fine handwriting said. Her heart tightened in that sweet, aching way. How many promises does time forget to fulfill, and how many does it simply postpone? She asked the fire, which answered with a crackle. She folded the letter again, tucked it back in, and thought, maybe some promises are just waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Outside, the postman crossed the square in his wool coat, his faithful dog Primo trotting beside him. No tricks today, got it? He warned, eyeing the dog. Primo wagged his tail, poorly hiding his mischief. As soon as the postman bent down to pick up a dropped letter, the dog yanked off his glove and ran, triumphant. I knew it, the man laughed, running after him. Children giggled from their windows, and even Miss Alba opened her door to watch the scene. He won again, she commented, smiling. As always, replied the postman, out of breath. And that's why I carry a spare pair. After the playful chase, the postman approached the Kettle house, still laughing. Alba, is there tea for tired heroes? Heroes and postmen pay the same price, she replied, handing him a steaming cup. Primo lay down by the fire, calmly licking his paws, knowing full well he'd be forgiven. This dog understands routine better than I do, said the postman. That's because dogs have a memory of scent, and they say the smell of joy never fades. He smiled. Then I want to carry a little bit of that joy in my pocket. Pour me another mug. As the postman and the innkeeper chatted, the tailor passed by the window, carrying a pile of fabrics. You're talking about scent, and all I can think of is the smell of wet wool haunting my dreams, he joked. Alba laughed. Wet wool is the official perfume of rainy days. Makes you want to stay. Stay where? Asked the tailor. Anywhere with warmth and tea. He nodded, with that half-tired smile of those who stitch life together, thread by thread, and went on his way. The baker arrived shortly after, carrying a basket covered with a thick cloth. The aroma preceded him like an invitation. Brought some new pies. Yesterday's were a quiet success. Ah, the best successes are the quiet ones, replied Alba, placing tea on the table. He uncovered the pie and added, with a knowing look, Did you know the lady from the blue townhouse came downstairs today? Stopped by the bakery to buy some flour. Said she wanted to try making something with a taste of courage. The innkeeper smiled, pleased. Then autumn has finally entered that house. These small, invisible victories were the village's secret fuel. No one announced them, but everyone felt them. The postman noticed them in people's expressions, the baker in the open windows, Miss Alba in the new pages of her book. It was as if every gesture was an ember, kept glowing in the everyday rhythm. Sometimes, the miracle wasn't in changing the world, but in keeping the fire burning while the world changed. On a lazy afternoon, the rain came down heavy. The whole village tucked itself away, and the Kettle house became a spontaneous shelter. The sound of wet boots echoed at the entrance. The doormat was soaked, and no one cared. Come in, the fire's generous today," said Alba, collecting coats. The postman hung his. The baker cracked his knuckles, and even the tailor showed up, carrying a roll of fabric to patch up time, as he said. Primo wagged his tail, and the air filled with familiar voices. As the wind beat against the windows, Mr. Rendell's violin began to play upstairs. No one quite remembered who had invited him. It felt like he had simply appeared, as the right things often do. "There's no bad weather that can resist music and hot tea," said the postman, "nor a heart that can resist pumpkin pie," added the baker. Alba laughed. "You all should be charging tickets for so much optimism." "Optimism isn't something you charge for," the tailor replied. "You offer it, like a full cup." And just like that, the idea for the autumn festival was born. No one really planned it. It was simply a wish that spread, first as a comment, then as a certainty. "We need to celebrate the little things," said the postman. "And be grateful for the bread that didn't burn," added the baker. "And for the stitches that held together," said the tailor. "And for the guests who return, even when they don't need to sleep," Alba concluded, raising her mug. "Then let's toast to beautiful repetition," she said. The clink of mugs sounded like a collective yes. In the following days, the village began to prepare. There were no written invitations, only signs. The baker left extra loaves on the counter, tied with red ribbons. The postman told the neighbors, "There'll be tea for everyone." The tailor hung colorful scraps of fabric in his windows, and Miss Alba wrote on the inn's chalkboard, "Autumn Festival, bring what warms your heart." It was enough. People understood. In the village, simple words always knew the way. The woman from the blue townhouse opened her door for the first time in weeks. Out in the yard, she picked yellow and purple flowers, tied them with an improvised ribbon, and placed them in a jar. "I still know how to make things beautiful," she murmured. The scent of the petals filled the hallway, chasing away the dust and the sadness. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who looked like someone she had forgotten, but who was now smiling again. Meanwhile, the tailor prepared his special tablecloth. The fabric was simple, but the edges were stitched with subtle designs, falling leaves, curved lines like wind. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he told himself. "It just has to be honest." And it was. Each stitch felt like a calm breath. When he finished, he folded the cloth and thought, "Every table needs something that reminds people of a human touch. This is my way of saying, I was here." On the morning of the marked day, the village seemed to wake up smiling. Chimneys puffed out smoke like welcome flags, and the air carried the sweet scent of anticipation. The Kettle house was already in motion. Miss Alba hung lanterns made of glass jars and golden ribbons, while Primo followed her, inspecting the floor for imaginary crumbs. "You're an excellent assistant," she said. The dog replied with a smug look and a soft wag of his tail, as if to say, "I know." The baker arrived early, balancing a basket on his arm. "I've brought enough bread and pies to feed an entire village, or at least part of it." Alba raised an eyebrow. "And the first batch?" "Oh, that's still an offering. The sky is pleased." They laughed together. The sound echoed gently, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the kettle. Every laugh in that inn seemed to polish the air. Later, the tailor appeared, carefully dressed, holding the folded tablecloth. "I brought my contribution," he said, almost solemn. "Perfect," said Alba, clearing space on the main table. "Not perfect, just honest." She nodded. "The best things are the ones that don't try to be more than they are." As he spread out the fabric, the threads caught the golden light of midday, and for a moment it looked like the tablecloth was breathing along with the house. The postman entered right after, carrying a brown envelope sealed with wax. This letter arrived with no sender, addressed to Kettle House. Alba frowned. "No sender?" "No sender," confirmed the postman, placing the envelope on the counter. She ran her finger over the seal and felt a slight shiver. Maybe some letters know the way back on their own. "Or maybe fate uses the post when it's in a hurry," said the postman with a smile. The afternoon moved slowly, carrying the village in a rehearsal-like rhythm. Mr. Rendell's violin echoed in the distance, tuning notes that seemed to warm the wind. Children ran back and forth, carrying ribbons, flowers, and laughter. Even the tabby cat, who always watched everything with disdain, decided to join in, climbing into windows to supervise the preparations. "Everyone wants to be part of it," said the baker, watching the cat settle on top of a pile of bread. "Some contribute by napping," Alba replied, laughing. As the sun began to hide behind the hills, the Kettle House looked like a living painting. The lanterns were lit one by one, casting warm glows over the windows. The scent of apple tea, spices, and fresh bread filled the street, and those passing by slowed their pace, as if the air itself asked for reverence. The postman, wearing new gloves, helped hand out mugs. "Tonight, no one leaves without a sip of liquid happiness," he declared. Primo barked in agreement. The woman from the blue townhouse arrived with the flowers. "I wasn't sure if they'd still be good," she said, holding the slightly awkward bouquet. Alba welcomed her with tenderness. "Flowers are never late." She placed the flowers in the center of the table, and the room seemed to change temperature. The tailor adjusted them gently, and the baker commented, "Now we've got spring inside autumn." "And that's exactly what makes autumn beautiful," said Alba. "It reminds us that beauty doesn't depend on the season." When the music began, time felt suspended. The violin played an old melody, one no one remembered learning, but everyone seemed to recognize. The baker tapped the counter, the postman whistled along, and the tailor, and to everyone's surprise, danced with a shy elegance. "I didn't know you stitched dance steps too," joked Alba. "Depends on the fabric," he said, turning slowly. "And this one?" she asked. "This one's velvet, soft and imperfect, like the kind of time we hold on to with care." The festival took on a life of its own. Laughter, stories, clinking mugs, pies cut into generous slices. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg mingled with firewood smoke and the distant sound of leaves swept by the wind. Children ran around with bunches of grapes. Primo played with cloth balls, and even the tabby cat got a special saucer of milk. "Let no one go to sleep tonight without a smile," said the baker, raising his cup. "And may the smile last until the next batch," added the postman, toasting with him. In the middle of the celebration, Miss Alba remembered the brown envelope. It was still on the counter, waiting, patient. She picked it up gently and broke the seal. Inside was a letter. It was the same handwriting as the old message kept in the guest book. "When the leaves fall again, I'll be on the stone bridge." Silence fell across the room. The fire cracked, and the music paused for a moment. Alba took a deep breath and said, "It seems autumn kept the promise on its own." And everyone understood that this was more than coincidence. It was an answer. The letter passed from hand to hand, and each person read it in silence, as if the paper carried not just words, but memories of someone they all somehow knew, without ever having met. The postman adjusted his hat, trying to hide the emotion. "Not every delivery arrives on time," he murmured, "but some show up just when we need them most." Alba nodded, slipping the envelope into the pocket of her apron, like someone protecting an extra heart. "Some stories come back just to remind us we're still here." The music resumed, softer now, and the sound of the violin blended with the crackling fire. The smell of apple and cinnamon grew stronger, almost tangible, as if the air itself wanted to join the conversation. The tailor sat near the fireplace, watching the tablecloth fabric reflect the golden light. "Look at that," he said. "Seems like the cloth came to life." "Maybe it did," replied the baker. "You stitched the spirit of the festival right into it." "Then I hope it knows how to dance," joked the tailor, and everyone laughed. Outside, the wind played with the leaves, scattering them across the cobbled streets like natural confetti. The village seemed to breathe in unison. In the windows, shadows moved gently. At the doors, voices exchanged good nights like blessings. The postman, stepping outside for a moment to clear his head, looked up at the sky. "The stars are back," he said, mostly to himself. Primo barked once in as if to confirm. Inside, someone began to sing an old melody about time passing slowly, and for a moment, it truly felt like it did. The woman from the blue townhouse sat near the fire, holding one of the flowers from her bouquet. "It's been so long since I was in a place full of voices," she confessed. Alba came closer, offering her tea. "Sometimes silence is just a pause waiting for company." "Do you think the company always comes back?" "It always does," Alba replied. "Not always in the same people, but always in the same feeling." The woman looked around and, for the first time, laughed with the others. That sound seemed to heal something old. The baker was slicing the last pieces of pie, chuckling to himself. "You know what's funny," he said, turning to the postman. "The best recipes I've ever made were born from mistakes. Once I swapped sugar for salt, only noticed when I tasted it." "And did you throw it out?" "No, I called it sea bread. No one believed me, but they sold out." The postman laughed out loud. "Creativity is just the stubbornness of someone who refuses to give up." "Exactly," said the baker. "And the oven is the best teacher for that." The tailor raised his mug and said, "I think we should toast to that, to stubbornness and to warmth." Alba raised her mug, "And to the bread that burns, but teaches." The woman from the blue townhouse lifted hers too. "And to the flowers that learn to grow again, and to the buttons that always find their way home," added the postman, glancing at the little girl now playing with Primo. The mugs clinked in a soft chime, and that sound seemed to mark the beginning of something, or perhaps the beautiful end of a cycle. Outside, the violin had fallen silent, leaving only the sound of the fire. The air held the good weight of a day well lived. Miss Alba picked up the guest book and opened it to the last blank page. The quill dipped into the inkwell, hesitated, then began to glide. Today everyone became family. She wrote slowly, savoring each letter like someone planting a seed. Then she closed the book, blew the ink dry, and left it resting on the counter. "You always write beautifully," said the baker. "It's not the handwriting," she replied. "It's the certainty." Gradually the guests began to leave. The postman put away his glove, this time without any theft. The tailor folded the tablecloth. The neighbor gathered her slightly wilted bouquet. The baker packed up the empty trays. Outside, the village was quiet, but not sad. It was a full silence, the kind that comes after music. Alba stood at the door, waving. "Come back when the cold gets stronger," she said, "or sooner if the heart calls." "Promise," said the postman. "But I think the heart will call early." When everyone had gone, only the sound of wind tapping on the glass and the soft crackle of fire remained. Miss Alba gathered the cups, straightened the chairs, and before putting out the fire, looked around. Every corner of the Kettle house seemed to hold an echo of laughter, a shadow of conversation, a fresh memory. She smiled, tired and content. "This is how a village grows," she murmured, "not with walls, but with stories." Outside, a leaf danced in the air, landing on the doorstep, like a period refusing to end the sentence. Primo came closer and lay down at her feet. Alba stroked the dog's head and said, "So that's it, my friend. Let there be more autumns." The dog sighed, and she blew out the last candle. The scent of tea still lingered, mingled with that of bread and firewood. In the darkness, the Kettle house seemed alive, holding within it the breath of the entire village. Outside, the tabby cat leapt over the wall and vanished into the mist. And somewhere, between the last flicker of the flame and the first chill of dawn, autumn bowed in gratitude. Midnight arrived like a thick blanket, covering the village in its breathing hush. The cobbled streets, still damp from the rain, reflected the lights of windows slowly going dark, one by one. The mist rose soft, drawing outlines that seemed imagined by dreams. Somewhere a window still held the distant sound of a violin, the echo of a night that didn't want to end, like a final flame resisting before surrendering to the dark. Inside the Kettle house, the fire had faded to embers, tiny islands of light beneath warm ashes. Miss Alba remained there, seated before the hearth, holding the guest book in her lap. The pages still smelled of fresh ink. "Today everyone became family," she read aloud, savoring the words. Primo slept at her feet, his breathing the perfect soundtrack to the end of a celebration that had turned into memory. Outside, the baker walked slowly toward his bakery, coat draped over his shoulders and a tired smile on his face. In his pocket, he carried a piece of pie Miss Alba had insisted he take. "For when the silence comes," she had said. When he arrived, he lit the oven by instinct, not for work, but as a habit of the soul. "The bakery gods deserve a post-party offering too," he murmured, and a small flame lit up the satisfied face of someone who understands that warmth must be passed on. The tailor, meanwhile, gathered the last scraps of fabric and placed the festival tablecloth into a lined box. He touched the stitching with his fingertips and thought of how many hands had rested upon that cloth. "A fabric is a silent witness," he told himself, "and kindness is the thread that never unravels." Then he extinguished the lamp, and the room faded into dimness, as if sleep itself were being stitched into the shadows. The woman from the blue townhouse placed the flowers from her bouquet in a vase by the bed. Some petals had fallen, but she didn't mind. Flowers are like memories, more beautiful when slightly unruly. She sat at the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, the air in the house felt light, free from the echo of absence. Outside, a cat crossed the wall, and she followed it with her eyes until it vanished. "Come back whenever you like," she whispered, and the smile came easily, without effort. Primo awoke to the rustle of leaves near the door. He stretched, looked at Alba, who was still writing a final line in the book, then walked to the exit. The innkeeper watched him, smiling. "Go on, friend. The postman must be waiting." The dog barked once, as if in reply, and disappeared into the dawn fog. A few minutes later, at the street corner, the postman spotted him coming. "There you are, partner, ready for another day." Primo wagged his tail, and together they followed the damp road, sharing the comfortable silence of those who understand one another without words. At the inn, Miss Alba rose slowly. She extinguished the lamps one by one, until only the glowing embers of the hearth remained. The light danced on the walls, casting shadows that moved like memories. She picked up the brown envelope and placed it inside the guest book, nestled between the pages that recorded the day of the festival. "That way no one gets lost," she said. Then she closed the book and blew out the fire completely, letting the warmth rest beneath the ashes. The village, now wrapped in stillness, felt like a sleeping organism, breathing, dreaming, holding within it the sound of laughter, the scent of pies, the warmth of shared mugs. The lanterns still swayed in the windows, and now and then a soft breeze made them whisper with a metallic hush. "Until tomorrow," the wind seemed to say. "Until always," the stones replied, in silence. At dawn, the mist dissolved, revealing the same old scene. But something subtle had changed. The doors looked more welcoming, the windows more open, the steps a bit slower. The baker waved to the tailor, who replied with a nod. The postman handed out the first letter of the day, with a smile that needed no words. And the woman from the blue townhouse, looking out her window, didn't just see the street. She saw an entire world waiting, made of simple gestures and invisible ties. At the Kettle house, Miss Alba was preparing the first kettle of the day. The rising whistle sounded just like all the others, but somehow more meaningful. She poured herself a cup, opened the book, and wrote a new line, like someone lighting one more candle. "The village sleeps in peace, but the heart awakens for the next gathering." Then she closed the book and looked out the window. The mist was already retreating up the hill, and the sun had begun to paint the rooftops with gold. "May the world remain kind," she whispered. And in the background, the kettle replied, whistling softly, as if to promise, "It will." And now, while the village rests beneath its blanket of mist and the distant sound of rain, perhaps you'll notice something curious. The calm that filled this story is also inside you. It arrived slowly, in the smell of the baker's bread, the snip of the tailor's scissors, the steam from Miss Alba's tea, and the living silence of the woman in the blue townhouse. After all, how many times in the rush of your days do you forget to hear the whistle of your own kettle? To notice the simple warmth of a small gesture, a good morning that lingers a second longer, a thank you that shifts the tone of a whole morning. The world may be loud, but maybe kindness is still the loudest sound. We just have to get close enough to hear it. So before you sleep, ask yourself, in what corner of your life is there still room for a gesture like the baker's, who gave what he had, or the tailor's, who stitched life with patience, or Miss Alba's, who turned an inn into a refuge? What story can you rekindle tomorrow, even if no one sees, even if it feels too small? Now, it's time to let your body rest and your heart keep wandering through this village of stone and golden light. And if sleep takes a while to come, you know the way. There's always one more story waiting for you, just around the next corner of the dream.